Well, Rob, we appear to have a podcast guardian angel. I still haven't recovered from what just happened.
Stressful, to say the least. Yeah, that wasn't particularly pleasant.
So basically, I had a really bad computer which crashed about 10 minutes into the recording with our guest, Andy Martin. And if it hadn't crashed 10 minutes in, we would never have discovered that Andy was talking to us through an interface that the recording app wasn't picking up. And we might have gone on to talk to him for over an hour without recording a word of what he'd been saying. So fortunately, Andy was willing to answer the first question again. And fortunately now for our listeners, the over an hour of conversation with one of the most interesting people in the surf writing business still exists. Horrendous experience, but amazing now.
Yeah, one of our 9 podcast lives gone on that one, I think, Tom.
And obviously, we interviewed Andy, but it felt a little bit like we'd kind of interviewed Ted Deerhust posthumously today as well, because that was who Andy's been writing about lately. And at the breakfast table, your dad said he knew him as well.
Yeah, randomly, of all the stories Dad's told over the years, I mentioned that we were interviewing this guy, Andy Martin, that's written a book about Ted Deerhust. He said, "Oh, I knew Ted." And he went on to give a load of tales about when he used to own the surf shop in Port Call, and Ted Deerhust would come along and try and flog boards that he'd made, and they weren't all of a high quality, shall we say. But you're going to need to listen to the podcast to find out more.
So your dad bought them out of sympathy anyway?
I think so, yeah. Dad's
what a guy.
A philanthropic heart. But there we are. There's lots to listen to in the show. A great interview, like we said. We really enjoyed it. It was like chatting to a mate come the end. But now's your chance to listen to it. So enjoy the show.
Oh, yeah. Cheers, Robbo.
The second episode of Crest.
He's here. It's the surf writer and author of newly released Surf, Sweat and Tears, Andy Martin.
We'll ask Andy all about the life and death of Ted Deerhust, as well as other North Shore tales from the edge.
And it's proven popular. More of your contributions to the surf trips of your nightmares.
So, welcome to Crest, everyone. We're just one episode plus a few minutes into this project, and already it feels like our calling in life. To my left is an author who was shortlisted at the 2015 Ogmore Valley Surf Literary Awards, finishing runner-up in the Toes on the Prose category. It's Tom Anderson.
I prepared this time, Rob. To my right is the man who turned down a place on the Kylean Rotary Club's honorary list of permanent committee members because he knew a video of him snaking the Monmouth MP David Davis for the wave of the day in Rest Bay was about to surface on Facebook, garnering no less than 17 angry views. Not wanting to bring the fine reputation of Rotary notaries into disrepute, he opted to lend us the bad publicity instead, and a podcasting career was born. It's Robert Webster Blythe.
Thanks, Tom. How you doing, mate?
Yeah, not too bad, not too bad. You've been outed about that one.
What I will say, I know. Well, what I will say, Tom, in fairness to me, true to his political form, David Davis was going right, even though it was clearly better to swing to the left on that one.
Did you look to make sure? Because he is goofy-footed, isn't he? Surely he'd prefer to be frontside on a 2-foot Rest Bay peak. Never mind, it might be a while yet before he gets the chance to return the favour anyway.
Yeah, I've actually burned a bit of land to it as well, but we'll keep that between us and our rapidly growing audience of loyal listeners, shall we?
Of course you have, of course you have.
Another thing I will say about the Right Honourable member for Monmouthshire is that we may differ on our political views, but he doesn't half respond quickly to emails and letters, Tom.
Really?
3 times I've contacted him and always replied within the week, even if it's just to disagree with whatever I'm saying.
All right, I get it. Republicans buy sneakers too and all that. Let's introduce our guest anyway, shall we?
Definitely. With us today is a man whose etiquette in the lineup has had to be beyond reproach, especially since he spent a lot of the 80s and 90s on the North Shore of Oahu during some of its most lawless ages. Surf writer Andy Martin is one of the great voices of the sport, be it broadcasting or penning his observations for publications like The Independent or The New York Times. Andy's coverage of surf culture is precise, poetic, thoughtful, and above all, exciting. Hiya, Andy.
Hey, Rob. Tom.
Nice to see you.
Thanks for coming, Andy. I've enjoyed several of Andy's books over the years, guys, and I stand by my claim to this day that Stealing the Wave, Andy's first-hand take on the epic and ultimately fatal rivalry between big wave riders Mark Fu and Ken Bradshaw, is the finest surf biography out there. And I'm not alone. The BBC boxing pundit Steve Bunce stated his praise for Stealing the Wave in simple terms, calling it the finest sports book he'd ever read. Before that, Andy used his experiences of trying to get a foot in the lineups of the North Shore for his autobiographical title, Walking on Water, which was shortlisted for the William Hill Sports Book of the Year. And today, he's going to be speaking to us about as much of this as we've got time for, as well as his newly released Surf, Sweat and Tears, which essentially lifts the lid on one of the most colourful characters ever to slog it out on the world tour, Ted Deerhust. Andy, yeah, it's great to see you. And you're going to stick around, I take it, for the whole podcast, so we should be able to get your take on whatever comes up.
In your hands, Tom.
Fantastic. So this is the bit where normally we'd start with the latest surf news, but as at the moment, surf news is basically that there isn't any, in the water at least. The big feel-good story, though, is that 2004 professional and current ISA world champ Sofia Milanovic has announced the birth of a son, Theo. Considering she was smoking the best of the WSL in Miyazaki only last autumn, that makes for a pretty good spell for Sofia. Crest wishes her congratulations. More positivity, it's now completely legit to hit the lineup again if you live in Portugal. This has led to several moments of envy as friends of ours from there have headed for the beach with the biggest grins you ever did see. Spain, well, we've heard reports from the Canaries that surfing is now allowed between 6 and 10 a.m. and then again after 8 p.m., although there's mixed reports as to how willingly that relaxation has spread to the mainland. And in France, news fresh in is that something might be afoot for Monday, with surfers in certain areas being allowed to return to the waves, but it's all down to the local prefectures and the mayors. Apparently, specific legislation has to be passed before that's going to be allowed, so we'll wait and see from Monday. And Andy, I understand that you spoke recently to Hawaiian legend Randy Rarick, who said the North Shore is strangely uncrowded right now. Are they allowed in the water there too?
Everything is different in Hawaii, isn't it? Yeah, Randy Rarick says that they're loving it in this corona crisis because there are no tourists, of course. And the locals have got it all to themselves because apparently, according to the legislation, although you're not allowed to congregate on the beach, you can congregate in the water and go surfing. So long as you've got a surfboard under your arm, you can get away with virtually anything, it seems to me. So yeah, in Hawaii, they're having a great time. It's good news, isn't it? But I still refuse to watch any of the footage from Hawaii because, I don't know, it's just unbearable seeing people having a good time.
Oh, I tell you what, you talk about a good time. I wouldn't have gone anywhere near that big bomb that Koa Rothman caught at Pipe. I think it was towards the end of April. Just looked like it was the wave of everybody's life, except, obviously you'd have to try and push yourself over the ledge first.
Yeah,
Pipe is just a different thing altogether, isn't it?
I'm with Andy on this. I've kind of shut down all the social media stuff that show me waves from anywhere, but somehow that Koa Rothman bomb managed to sneak in through the gaps, and I did see it, and it was a wave, all right.
Pipeline is one of the scariest waves on the planet for sure, actually. And I recall even seeing the great Martin Potter, our only number one, I think, if GB can claim it, back off of a wave at Pipeline in the midst of the contest. Moreover, when you would have thought he could have taken it, but I checked with him afterwards. He said, no, he just couldn't quite face it. So that's coming from Pot. So yeah, taking off a Pipeline, it's challenging, whoever you are.
And Ted Deerhust, who you've just written a book about, had a slot in the Pipe Masters quite a few times, didn't he? I've seen a fair few photos of him with that iconic 90s Pipe Masters competition jersey with the 0101 of is it Mori? It was a Japanese company, I think it was, that used to sponsor the Pipe Masters back then. Should we start with talking about Ted, Andy? Could you perhaps tell us in your terms who Who was Ted, and what did Ted Deerhust mean to the sport of surfing?
Yeah, I think some of those pictures of him at Pipeline might sum it up rather well, particularly if you'd also seen a picture of him. You probably saw a picture of him, going into the water and paddling for the wave. But then you also need a picture of him coming out of the water after he's just blown it for about the 10th time. And then you would get the whole picture. Yeah, Ted and the sport of surfing. I mean, the whole story is right there. By the way, he was brilliant at Sunset. Let me just be fair to Ted. Not everyone was fair to Ted, seems to me. And at Waimea. So he definitely got a rep on the North Shore as a big wave guy, for sure. Rather than a contest guy. But that, of course, was the amazing thing that he persisted, on the world shore despite all the rebuff. What does Ted mean for the sport of surfing? Well, if you look up the records, you can find that he registered, I think, about 231st in the world back in 1990 something. So he's there. But say again, sorry, Tom.
It's not too shabby.
No, I mean, it's significant. And I remember one year he was actually equal with Shawn Thompson, no less. Although Shawn Thompson, by that stage, was semi-retired and just put in one appearance at a contest, I think. But anyway, he would have been pleased with that result, nevertheless, I think. So, yeah, Ted, a hero to me and a legend in many ways, dead now over 20 years, died young, age 40. I wrote his obituary. I knew him probably for about 10 years, the last 10 years of his life. And was always mystified by how he came to die so young. And that's partly what drove me to write this book about him. But summarizing his life, Lord Ted, as he became known, son of the Earl of Coventry and the daughter of an American hamburger millionaire. Interesting life for sure. His parents split up, and his mother took him off to sort of kind of kidnap him and took him off to the West Coast, California, Santa Monica, where he was brought up, took up surfing under the wing of Tony Alva, no less, great skateboard champion. But then was kidnapped back again by his father, age 15. And his mother was chucked in jail, by the way. So he was kind of torn between cultures.
He was delighted about that.
Yeah, his wife, whom I met, didn't remain married for very long, but his wife, whom I met, said that, he stopped growing at that point, literally and figuratively, perhaps, at age 15. And I think, if you can think just momentarily all the thoughts that you thought age 15, okay, that was what Ted thought, all the way through the age of 40. Which is beautiful and also tragic and certainly poignant and actually slightly comic as well. You think of the life of a 15-year-old. But so that was Ted. And he actually represented Britain as an amateur and then went on to the pro circuit and kept on trying. Did pretty well and scored a couple of contests, big Sunset, got a semi-final, Sunset in the 80s. I think that the moniker Lord Ted, which he acquired, although technically it was Viscount, served him well in some respects in getting in through the door of certain contests, but didn't enable him to win anything because it counted against him where the judges were concerned, who, really tended to privilege underprivileged kids from Brazil, for example, and tended to underscore Ted, sadly. So that he suffered a bit, but nevertheless, he was a brilliant guy and had a brilliant life and really had no complaints, I think.
It's interesting how he's known internationally then, by that, the moniker, the Lord on the board. Back here in Britain, I suppose, where, we know what lordships and what, sort of inheritance is and can mean and what the class system is, there was something a little bit more admirable about what he did, the dropping out aristocrat, and I think that really captured people's imaginations. And actually, there's a planned exhibition of his life too, isn't there, in the family home Croom in Worcester this June to accompany the book. I got family just around the corner, so I'm going to be making my way there for sure as soon as it is safe to do so.
Please do. You might not need to come in June as such, but that exhibition will be happening, and I think it's going to be brilliant. I've certainly seen some parts of it, and it looks fabulous. And it's great that they are, paying this homage to Ted, for sure, actually. And he'll have appreciated the posthumous recognition. Rather like Van Gogh, if you think of it. Ignored in his lifetime and then dead. Oh, great work, man. So
I love that similarity. Yeah,
that's what he. Yeah, it's like that, I think, actually. But
and I mean, within.
Yeah.
Sorry, go on, Andy.
No, please, you go ahead.
Within surfing, Ted moved around with the sort of a lot of the elites of surfing, didn't he, in his time? And as a result, then you've got to speak to some pretty interesting figures during the research for this book. Richard Cram, for one, and Shawn Thompson. What an amazing person Shawn Thompson is, and what was he like to meet?
Thompson, fabulous guy. I mean, so articulate, and he's one of the brainiest surfers you'll ever run into. Obviously we're all geniuses, but he is outstanding, and was doing. If I remember, while he was being world champion, he was also taking a degree in economics at a university in South Africa. So he was doing it all, and of course he made that great film, Busting Down the Door, and works for charity. He's such a lovely guy, and he certainly was very helpful to me. And he and Ted formed a bit of a partnership at some stage, one has to say. It's a bit of an ironic partnership in the sense that, Thompson was already world champion, several times over, but he was still trying to improve. And he actually employed Ted as his videographer. And they would, go through the film of his latest tube ride, immediately afterwards. And Thompson would be saying, do you think I could just, finesse that a little bit, just score a few more points? And, would that be just a tiny bit of class if I did this or that? And Ted would be offering advice, but muttering under his breath, I wish that was me. So, Ted, wanted to be Thompson, essentially. But there was that. And he hoped a bit of the stardust would rub off on him, I think, actually. But, he was frustrated in that. But, yeah, he was great. He was a great, as well as a really good surfer, he was actually a fan of great surfers as well, actually, and admired what they were doing and to some extent replicated it, I think, actually.
And speaking of other great surfers, you stayed with Rusty Miller, who was one of the stars of Morning of the Earth and one of the first people. Well, I can't remember if it was him or Steve Cooney who rode the first wave out of the two of them. The first people to surf Uluwatu, which really is a kind of Shangri-La within the surf world, isn't it? And it's interesting that there's a passage in the book about Ted surfing at Padang Padang. And this was something that really stuck with me, the tale of how Ted got the wave of his life at Padang Padang. And then it turns out that the photographer that was sitting in the channel, I think it was captured from land, wasn't it? But the photographer sitting in the channel had turned the camera off deliberately. And that seemed typical to me of the tragic and heroic features of Ted, his life and his way of doing things. Why had that happen? Why does somebody turn a camera off when you take off on the wave of your life?
I know, it's a fascinating, weird story, that, isn't it? But yeah, Rusty Miller, Ted, and I certainly had in common. Uluwatu was my first wave, weirdly enough, but although I got thrown out by an Australian. But anyway, that's another story. But yeah, and Ted, actually, I would say that was the wave of his life to some extent, Padang Padang. And it was just that, yeah, he was somewhat let down by, dare I say, Dan Merkel. The wonderful Greg Hugland was on the shore taking footage of, and they were both being paid to do this job. It was a film made by Dick Cool in Australia and also Asian Paradise. And so it looks good. But yeah, there was Dan Merkel right there in the water, and you can see it. You can look back at the footage of this. And Ted finishes the wave. It's like, imagine you've just served the greatest wave of your life, and then the sort of greatest water cameraman of the era is right there in the water, and you go, oh, that's great. He's just taken the film. And then you look at him, and he shakes his head. No, I had it switched off. There, how'd you like that, man? And the reality is, Dan Merkel and Ted did not get on. And Dan Merkel was one of those guys who had a little bit of a grudge against Ted on account of the stupid moniker of Lord Ted. And I think he referred to him as Little Lord Fauntleroy at one point, actually, against sort of American put down. But Ted was, the hardest, most persistent trier in the world. And no way was he sort of decadent layabout at all. So Merkel had it completely wrong to my way of thinking. They'd clashed over one or two things. And Merkel, and to this extent, representative of I think, the ASP subsequently, just did not, failed, really, mentally, intellectually, was incapable of grasping that Ted was the most serious guy on the planet. He just thought that, this was kind of frivolous playboy sometimes. Utterly wrong. But that is the deep background.
And then also, you describe how they had argued the evening before because Ted was not into or didn't have any respect for the drug scenes that were so closely intertwined with some of the surfing communities in those decades. Because this was, of course, the busting down the door era after all, wasn't it? And that was something that they'd argued over the evening before, according to the book.
I think most people who were involved in the early days of the formation of the genesis of the ASP, and the growth, actually meteoric growth, really, of the whole contest scene, with states in the 80s, they would probably not argue with me if I were to describe those early days as synonymous with drug trafficking. To some extent, it was actually funded by pushing marijuana around the planet, from one place to another. And, that was happening in Indonesia when Ted was there. And, he was not puritanical, but I think he objected to a certain, the criminalization of surfing. I think he wanted to, I think even at that stage, he was very pro-charity. Remember that Ted founded this great charity called Excalibur, and now it's become normal to find charity involved in surfing. Then, with the rise of professionalism, it was all about how can I make some money out of this? And drug trafficking, drug smuggling, and filling your surfboard with hashish became the norm at a certain point. And Ted revolted against that. Dan Merkel did not agree with Ted, so it was one other grudge between them or disagreement, and that partly, amongst many things, really led to the issue in the water. And I still find it bizarre because Merkel really was simply being paid to do the job. So although the irony is that although he was claiming that Ted was not a serious professional, it was he, Merkel, who was insufficiently professional when it came to taking the picture.
Yeah, it's a horrible story, that is, for somebody who can sympathise with that, how important the best wave of your life is. Gosh, I remember being absolutely gutted when Alex Lewis had packed up his camera just a second before I had a little cover up at Ogmore Rivermouth one morning. So I can't even imagine what it must be like with the wave of your life at Padang Padang. Form of rejection, that is, as well, I suppose. And there was a couple of interesting quotes about Ted in the book that really stood out to me. One of them being this idea that he wanted to be rejected. There's also the idea that he had a nostalgia for the future, which I take partly I match that up now to that comment you just made about his remaining 15 in his head, that sort of optimism of the teenager with the world in front of them. And it's really, I love the way that you talk about Excalibur, the board that Ted shaped, and the kind of Arthurian fable that he sort of saw himself in, and the knight errantry of the way that he lived his life. And then there was also a great hint that I've added to my reading list there. Aaron James's Surfing with Sartre, an aquatic inquiry into a life of meaning. So I've put that on the reading list for myself going forward as well. So there's lots of really interesting psychoanalytical and existential questions that Ted as a character has raised there. I want to focus on that idea of wanted to be rejected and Ted's relationships with women. And there's a brilliant sequence in the book when he poisons a love rival. They're in boarding school, and there's a girl who he likes, and she spends the night with this fella. And you say that there's a possibility that Ted had to listen to them all night long, and then the following morning it turned out that he'd poisoned the guy, and could have seriously hurt him. What's that all about?
That is incredible. I mean, where is that a desire to be rejected? I'm not sure. I mean, that was obviously apparently he assured this wonderful woman, Daya, a Palestinian American woman who was at the school with Ted and who was part of that story. He told me about this when I met her in New York, and the guy in question. By the way, let me assure this to the podcast that the guy in question did survive. They didn't have to go and bury the body somewhere, or tow him up to sea or something. He did survive, but he was taken off to hospital and had his stomach pumped. And Ted assured this very nice woman, Daya, afterwards, well, I didn't intend to do him any serious harm. I just wanted him to feel uncomfortable. And, you think about it, okay, hence the 15-year-old brain at work here in the sense that, okay, well, how much rat poison is the right amount exactly? So you can quantify the amount of discomfort that you're going to cause to your loved rival. I mean,
we're trusting a 15-year-old to get that right.
Yeah, it makes sense in the Beano or the Dandy or something, but in reality, anyway. So, he was asking for trouble. Okay, I mean, funny enough, psychoanalytically speaking, we actually did discuss Freud, and I did try to introduce Ted to a psychiatrist in Hawaii, needless to say, and he came out with this thing, and that is actually true. I've met this psychiatrist and wanted to put them together, but Ted wasn't having it because, first of all, he said, oh, you think I'm mad, don't you? And I said, well, yeah, maybe. And he said, okay, here's the thing. Perhaps I should go and see the psychiatrist so that I can provide her with a barometer of normality by which to judge all the other a sure sign of madness. There was one. Okay,
yes,
so I think this proves the case. But no, his craziest thing, and I mentioned this in the book, and this is what gets him into a lot of trouble, and I don't know if you want to mention the trouble too much, is his theory of the perfect woman. I mean, and when he started coming up with this theory, which he persisted in, by the way, and we had many conversations, and he took absolutely no notice of anything I said, but nevertheless, I can remember saying to him, well, look, show me the perfect guy, and I'll show you the perfect woman. And he, of course, lacking irony, thought I was being serious about this and came up with some sort of combination of Shawn Thompson and Winston Churchill, basically. Yeah, that's the perfect guy. And so similarly, he thought the perfect woman, yeah, he actually had the cartoon image in his head of the perfect woman. I said, look, man, even if that was real instead of, some stupid cartoon in your head, you're looking at a world of pain here because, you're ruling out 99.99% of, the other half of the human race right there. So why would you do that? So really, yeah, clearly he wanted to be rejected. And in the end, he was very seriously rejected, not just by the perfect woman, but also by the perfect woman's boyfriend.
Which, well, okay, we'll avoid the spoilers here, but Andy, you don't think Ted died of natural causes, do you?
I don't. The funny thing about Hawaii, I mean, we've discussed it sometimes actually. Hawaii is so mythic and myth-making. It's like talking to someone from Hollywood. I mean, it's a certain equivalent of Hollywood, isn't it? So everyone has, I mean, not just Ted with a cartoon head. I mean, everyone in Hawaii has got some kind of, mythic brain going on. And so when you actually ask them, well, what happened to, Bob or Fred or Joe on that Wednesday of last week, especially if it was like 20 years ago, they don't tend to address it, in the sort of, clear-cut, specific, empirical terms that you and I might use. And it's just like, oh, be cool, man. And hey, there's a breeze coming, man. I mean, there's a big swell coming, and look, you just relax and chill out. And geez, that drives me completely crazy. Hawaii, I become a complete fact hound when I hit Hawaii. Normally, I'm fairly relaxed about these things, and I'm fairly mythic myself in some respects. But no, Hawaii drives me crazy, and I need to know the truth. And so that's what took me back there and try to find out what happened to poor Ted.
Hawaii has contributed a few of these sort of dubious deaths to surfing, hasn't it? We've got mystery around what happened to Eddie Aikau. Wonderful passage in the book as well. Wonderful, horrifying passage in the book about Eddie Aikau being denied entry to South Africa on account of his skin being too dark, and Shawn Thompson having to tell the authorities to let him in. Heartbreaking. And then, of course, we've got Andy Irons more recently, and then Mark Fu, who you've written about. So that does seem to be
the funniest thing about the Eddie Aikau story, if I can tell you that, of course, in the golden age, so to speak, of apartheid, is they had all these categories of people in South Africa. They weren't quite sure which category the Hawaiian guy fitted into, but they knew it wasn't quite right, whatever it was. And that's why he got shut out. But yeah, you're right. Shawn Thompson's dad it was, in fact, smoothed it over and made it okay again. And I guess that's why Shawn Thompson ended up living in California.
And how much of Hawaii's misto is given to it, or its mystery is given to it by the surf, Andy? There's a great sequence as well about you absolutely eating it at sunset. You talk about the brain spooling out of your head, and it was Ted who pushed you over the ledge on that one, wasn't it?
If we were talking about my White House at sunset, we'd be here a long time. But yeah, that was an interesting occasion for Ted. I was having a good time at Cammy's just down, and Ted insisted, no, it's got to get bigger. It's got to, come on, man, get serious. You got to come to sunset, into my territory. And of course, I blew it. But Ted was very nice about it, actually, and helped me out of the water again with blood pouring out of my head. And so that was a classic Ted thing. That mixture of disaster and comedy and pain and kind of. The great thing about Hawaii is it's full of stories. That's for sure. You're right. The mystery side of stories of Hawaii. Everyone has a story to tell. Some of them true. I can remember that one thing that sticks in my mind is I was in a car and somewhere on the North Shore, and a fight broke out because one guy described his wave as 20 foot, and some other guy said, that was never 20 foot, man. I swear, the whole of the bar, apart from me and one other guy, was like in the eye of the storm. It was like a Western. They were bashing chairs over each other's heads and everything over the size of a wave. Okay, so, this is, it's a big deal in Hawaii. And of course, those things are indeterminate as well, actually. So there's always calls for argument and dispute, for sure.
That's funny. And talking of Hawaii, Andy, one of the books that I've really enjoyed reading about Hawaii was Chas Smith one, Welcome to Paradise, Now Go to Hell. And there's a comment in your book about the North Shore which caught my attention, and you described it as not paradise, but paradise lost. Now, neither Tom nor I have ever been to Hawaii, so how did you start spending time in Hawaii, and how have you seen the place change over the years?
I blagged my way into Hawaii. I don't think it's possible to do it anymore, but somehow I talked my way into a job of, believe it, a surfing correspondent at the time. And on the back of that, I got a free ticket to Hawaii to go and cover the tour there. And of course, I was using all of that as a cover to go surfing myself. So everything was a bit of a con, about 3 times over. But but somehow, although I was, what's that, fake it till you make it, it became serious for me.
Yeah.
And it's a fascinating culture. It's not just the surfing, but because it's so surfing set as well, that everyone on the island has an opinion of something, and you get fights breaking out and so on. But I was completely drawn into it, and it's just so full of good stories. That being a surf reporter, which is what I was, it actually became a serious job. I mean, admittedly, it's a little bit like being Father Christmas. You're not called upon that often, but still, it was cool when it was happening.
And presumably, you've seen it change a lot over the years.
Oh, it's a paradise aspect. Do you want me to say, it was great once upon a time. Now it's all gone to pieces. I guess I can't say that because it was terrible in many respects. Way back when, actually. So I'm not going to put out a myth of the golden age. And you referred to Crossing Down the Door era. When people were sleeping with if it was not a baseball bat under your pillow, it was a shotgun. You could get hold of it. So that there was a lot of it's a beautiful and fabulous place, and I'd go back there like a shot tomorrow if there was a flight I could ever get on. But it tends to attract the bad guys. And the bad guys get there first, and it's got to. And of course, historically, Hawaii is a scene of conflict. Not just thinking of Captain Cook, I'm thinking European contact and sort of accidental quasi-genocide. Largely accidental anyway, but then the annexation by the states, that kind of conflict. But even going back before that, anthropologists say that those that we refer to Native Hawaiians became Native Hawaiians by virtue of wiping out a pre-existing group of Hawaiians. So it is a fabulous place, but it's also a scene of incredible violence. And I suppose Ted and that whole story that I tell somehow kind of, for me is an allegory of all of that.
And of course, Hawaii was the setting for the big wave rivalries of the 80s and 90s, which you wrote about in Stealing the Wave. And what made that rivalry, the Mark Fu and Ken Bradshaw, so exceptional, in your opinion?
Yeah, because there were a lot of rivalries, I suppose. It's partly because for one reason, because of course Fu died young at Maverick, and so became died a good-looking corpse, as James Dean would say, and so it's partly because I knew them both quite well, and Ken Bradshaw, the hellman of the North Shore, showed me how I could, if I was so moved, how I could bite a chunk out of someone else's surfboard, which is showed me, how to hold it, just the right angle and stuff. I never tried it, by the way, but now I know how to do it theoretically.
And he actually did it, didn't he?
Yeah, he did it with Fu, and broke his fins off and everything, actually, to intimidate him. And Fu was, to some extent, intimidated, but I guess I love that whole... as a writer, it was a great story, the two of them. But I liked both of them equally. They were such different guys, and I actually thought of them in slightly philosophical terms, and Bradshaw was very much the kind of loner existentialist, kind of hard man for whom hell is other people, essentially. And Fu was very much this kind of laid back, sort of Zen sort of guy who, nevertheless, was very shrewd and was an entrepreneur at the same time. So they were very conflicting characters. And that was the beauty of it, I think. And surfing, and we forget this because those who don't surf tend to sort of stereotype surfers, but those two guys show that surfing is just a microcosm, and you've got these incredibly antithetical characters within it.
Any more characters from your time there, Andy, or from anywhere else that you're thinking might make for a future book?
I mean, Tom, sorry to crack up and laugh, but I know you are the author of many, many great works of surfing. Countless, I might say. Now,
you can't worried I'll pinch something, fair enough.
No, I've now written, look, if you come to the TED book, that's 3 books. Okay, I'm counting that as a trilogy. I think a trilogy is cool. Do I want to add a 3? Sorry to crack up at that, but
this whole podcast has been established as an elaborate ruse, so Tom can get some ideas from you because he's got writer's block.
Okay, no, I know that there are
I'm done for. That's it.
In progress even as we speak. So I should be pinching ideas from you, not the other way around.
Right, okay, I'm sharing that David Davis dropping video even more widely now, Rob.
All right, here's one character who deserves a book because he always used to crack me up. Ace Cool. Now,
he's dead now, isn't he?
It's the helicopter guy, isn't he?
He's the helicopter guy who, at certain points, certainly claimed to have surfed the biggest wave on the planet. And I think that was largely true, and I liked him. Now, you say that he's dead, but now, is he actually dead? Because disappeared mysteriously. I think I might need to go back to Hawaii to check
get your pen out.
Andy's age now going, shut up.
Right, so I'll move it swiftly on. Andy, your books focus on quite specific elements of surf culture, and your stories are focused around certain characters. When you start a project, do you have quite a rigid structure that you try to bend your research towards for the purposes of entertainment or interest, or are you more guided by your research? Is it a more flexible, reactive process?
There's this funny word that I kind of tend to live by that is a bit slightly obscure word and indeed gets pronounced in different ways. But I pronounce it as aleatory, and the Americans, when they use it, pronounce it as aleatory. And it really just means random or chance and luck, actually. And I would say, all of my books rely entirely on luck. They're aleatorical work. I mean, they're just accidental, and they just somehow get stuck together. And it's just, I feel like one of those photographers who's just lucky to be in the right place at the right time. And those stories just come to you if you wait for them. So to answer your question, I don't feel as though I have to do anything very much other than listen to what people say, which it doesn't seem like very hard work, does it? But
and the plane ticket to Hawaii helps.
Oh yeah, that of course. But I think some of those stories are just so good. You've just got to get out of the way of them, really, and just let them tell themselves. I think. I think that's what I try to do. I try not to work too hard, in other words.
Yeah, I can get on board with that. So, as I alluded to in our first show when discussing some more recent changes to pro surfing, I feel that surfing is unique as a sport in that most surfers feel quite a keen sense of ownership. They're quite protective of it. Does this influence what you choose to write or not to write, as the case may be, so as to avoid offending or alienating people, often presumably friends, colleagues, heroes? And what I mean by that is obviously when you're relaying these stories, you can't please everyone all of the time. Do you feel that you perhaps hold off on some things, especially when you're writing about such esteemed or notable characters?
I do hold back sometimes, particularly if it's Johnny Boy Gomes who's in question. And
yeah, I feel you.
And especially if he's just pulled a screwdriver out of his pocket and is not planning to do any DIY unless it's on me. So I have been known in certain circumstances to back off, funny enough. And and there was one other case where I thought, that'd be a very good story. And the Times of London would be interested to hear this, Mr. X, wouldn't they? Mr. X said, "I don't think that's a good idea, man." And you know what? I agreed with him that it was not a good idea. And so I think there's certain circumstances where, in order to be able to do your job, you still need to be able to walk, by and large, I find. So, but yeah, I try to be fair and tell the stories, and it will sometimes get you into trouble. Trying to be as truthful as possible, if that's not too ridiculous. But so, for example, okay, in terms of the book you mentioned, Seeing the Wave. I mean, the funny thing really about that was Mark Fu was much easier to interview being dead than Ken Bradshaw, who was alive, of course. And Bradshaw very quickly, and so afterwards, Bradshaw read the book, and he first of all said, "Hey, that's a cool book, man," and phoned me up and said so. And then someone happened to say to him, "Hey, Ken, but you're the bad guy." He called me back and said, "Am I the bad guy?" And I tried to assure him that since this was not a Tom and Jerry cartoon, that there was no clear cut good guy and bad guy, and there was a certain complexity to the whole thing, and he'd just have to roll with it. So I don't know. I try to be kind of fair, to everyone, and including the reader, by the way, and not just the guys who are in it.
I suppose I'll touch on this briefly. There's been a criticism kind of leveled at the surf industry of years gone by, where certain characters, notable people that many regarded as heroes, were kind of protected from the full truth ever being exposed. And I mean, in the case of Andy Irons, people argue that it cost him his life, but so that's another podcast in the works there. So I've actually got a couple of questions that I'm going to try and throw Tom off here by posing to both of you as authors. So, and it's a problem that I imagine you both had to wrestle with at some point in your writing careers, that surfing is so often misrepresented in popular culture and by non-surfing media, in films, in music, in the news, that I think it kind of plays into that protectiveness that I talked about earlier, that the community feel towards surfing. How do you both, as surfers and writers, that are obviously trying to reach as broad an audience as possible with regards to your sales of your books, how do you strike that balance between staying true to surfing as we know it, whilst also making it accessible for non-surfers, for the layperson? And there's an example that's often lauded as getting it just right, and that is Barbarian Days by William Finnegan, which is loved by surfers and non-surfers in equal measure. So how do you achieve that delicate balance? Do you want to take it away, Tom, to start with?
Well, yeah, when I was putting together my first book, when it wasn't yet published, the poet Sheena Pugh was my creative writing tutor, and she told me about she really liked just using the surf lingo and leaving it there, and then actually Summersdale maybe put a glossary in the back, but Sheena Pugh used to call it the tale of the Jabberwocky. So she used to say, "Oh, look, leave this paragraph. It's a tale of the Jabberwocky," as in the tale of the Jabberwocky, we know the noises mean something, and we don't really care what they mean because we know they mean something to someone. And I suppose I like listening to cricket on the radio, and often I love all the terminology, and I love not quite getting it. So I used to sort of think about what it was like to listen to cricket and not quite get everything, or listen to complex economics on Radio 4 and not quite get it. And I just used to think, I want to create that kind of feeling for someone who doesn't get it, as long as you try and make it a bit lyrical and you sound like you know what you're on about. I kind of trust that people will go with me. But like I said, Summersdale did make me stick a glossary in the back of Riding the Magic Carpet.
And Andy, how do you go about kind of forging that gap?
Well, of course, I feel as though you're doomed to failure, aren't you? At some level, actually, pitching, seeking perfection there. Finnegan definitely managed to strike the right note, I think, in Barbarian Days. And persisted, actually, and that's one of the slightly heroic things about he's not a pro performer, but certainly persisted incredibly with certain stay true to it, I guess, actually, still. I believe on the East Coast, I was in touch with him not so long ago, on the East Coast of the state. actually, no, based in New York, last I heard. But I think the only way that you can approach it is not to stereotype it. Actually, just treat it as part of the grand continuum that is life and death and being and nothingness, and all of that gets somehow symbolized in surfing, and the thing is just to sort of extract it back out of surfing and try to tell that story, which is like everything all at once, and you've got to grapple with it and not treat it as something kind of marginal and eccentric and slightly off the grid. In a way, it's all of those things, but it's also a kind of it just summarizes all of the kind of the pain and pleasure of existence generally.
Yeah, I understand.
And the aspiration actually, and the failure, and the fundamental benevolence and the malice that is within humanity.
I feel that surfers are always quite welcoming of surfers being the people that put that kind of content out there, rather than the likes of the mainstream media. I say that in inverted commas, that all too often get it wrong. It's usually if it ever appears on the news, or quite often when it appears on the news, it'll be footage of someone who can't actually surf in the shallows to the tune of the Beach Boys. And don't get me wrong, I love the Beach Boys. I went to see them last year in Cardiff.
As do I.
There's more to surfing than that, and in many people's eyes, I think that is surfing kind of encapsulated. Now, I was going to say, I take your point about the surf media industry, who kind of glossed over a lot of thing of the Andy Irons case in particular, and I hate that really. And I've never felt I've been part of that. Really, why I've work for other parts of the media, if you like, because it seemed to, it was like an absurd, antithesis to the stereotyping that came from, the non-surfing media, if you like, actually tried to counterpoint that, but it seemed just as wrong. So I guess, one tries to avoid the obvious absurdities, actually. Yeah. Now, in many people's eyes, mine included, style is the most important thing in surfing, and if not the most important thing, certainly very, very important. And although we all have our own unique styles, and they really are unique, I can, at our local beach at Rest Bay, I can tell who's in the water at low tide from a couple hundred meters away, looking into the sun just by the way someone holds their arms. But although we all have these unique styles, we also like to borrow elements from certain people whose styles we admire. Would you say it's a similar thing with writing? We all have our favorite authors, but as authors yourselves, is there anyone's style that you're particularly inspired or influenced by, or try to mimic or channel to any extent?
I get nervous answering that one.
Well, hold on. There's this guy called Tom Anderson. I think he influenced me quite a bit, actually, over the ages.
I'm getting whitewashed by the press here.
You get,
but no, there's so many writers, and I mean, Jack London. I admired his writing about surfing once upon a time, actually, and I mean, better not start listing people, because I'll leave people out and they'll be phoning me up and getting offended. So
I also worry about
the end. You try to. What I would say is, I try to forget about the writing and the influences and so on. I know what you mean, because I can certainly remember, as it were, parroting one or two in bygone days, and I forget about writing and just think more about the reader, to be honest.
It's interesting what you say there, Andy, about you kind of forget about it and let it happen, because I suppose that's the same thing in surfing. If you're perhaps on a really critical wave, you're not thinking about anything other than the couple of meters in front of you. There's a parity there.
That's right. It's only, as with Ted, when you come off the end of the wave and you want, someone to be there applauding you, as it were. Same with
or filming you, as the case may be.
Or filming you, you definitely want that. So there's a point in the middle of the whole thing. You're right. When you're really trying to surf the wave properly, where it's just you and the wave, and it's just you and the words, You forget about everything else, actually. But really, I sort of like to imagine I'm just talking to someone sitting on the sofa next to me, at an appropriate distance, of course, now, but nevertheless, with some degree of proximity and, probably more as if, rather as now, I'm just having a conversation with you. So as I've got older, I've probably gone more oral, so to speak, rather than more literary, I think.
Okay.
I get nervous answering that question because I kind of feel as if you're saying...
we're going to have fingers crossed, we're going to have an awful lot of time to discuss your writing styles on future episodes. So I'm going to excuse you from this one, if you don't mind.
Oh, thank you, because I don't want to get hung up. But I will say Andy's in safe territory trying to say that he wants to write as well as me, because he's definitely far beyond already.
Well, Andy, I'm going to bring a couple of moments ago when we were talking about, on the last question, talking about William Finnegan, and you mentioned briefly the East Coast of the United States.
Yeah.
And am I right in saying that you've been based in New York at some point in your career?
Yes, off and on.
And you covered the Quicksilver Pro New York back in 2011 for was that the New York Times or the Independent?
Yeah, that was a funny one, and that was like a miracle, because for starters, it was on Long Island, where the surf is notoriously flaky, and they actually have one of the best swells. I think was it September?
Well, I was going to say it's an event that's remembered very fondly by fans of professional surfing for the fact that to many people's surprise, they lucked into those firing waves in New York, through to the fireworks in the water with Slater's kind of Hail Mary 10-point ride in that semi-final, through to the fireworks on land with that infamous clip that started as a Todd Klein post-win interview with Bobby Martinez after one of his heats, and it kind of ended as a monologue or a diatribe railing against the ASP as it was then, and their tennis tour mentality. So it was an electric event for viewers. What was it like being there?
Well, of course, I was naturally missing a lot of it. And I'm glad you reminded me of some of those things, because we were actually doing this funny thing. It was actually for the New York Times, but I was shooting a film, in fact, with a couple of guys, which I think we called, which listeners can, I think it's still on the New York Times website somewhere, actually. I think it's called,
was it called Miracle in New York? Was that it?
Or Fairy Tale of New York?
Fairy Tale of New York.
Surfing Fairy Tale of New York, I think it is, actually. God, have you seen that?
I think I've seen that.
Yeah, okay. We're we took this guy from a Quicksilver shop, in fact, actually, a store in Times Square, that's right. And he was a surfer, but from the south of the state, I think possibly Florida. And he was a good surfer in small ways. And we took him from there. We were going to build this little documentary around him, which was also a fairy tale. And by the way, somehow Freud got in there as well, actually. I was reading out some of one of Freud's texts, actually. Was it Civilization? It's Discontent? Yeah, that one, actually. So it's a very weird surf movie. Just a warning for anyone who might want to look this up. But the funny thing about that was, okay, so we inserted our friend from the Quicksilver store into the contest, so to speak, in these big waves. But it was too big for him. He said, man, I've never surfed waves as big as this before. How do you expect me to do this? So we actually had to sort of work around it to some extent and build in a lot more footage from the contest itself than actual, real, genuine, hardcore surfing from our main protagonist, in fact. But still, it worked. It worked quite well, simply because, of course, the notion of surfing in New York is itself so unlikely. But there, it shows it can happen.
Yeah, I've surfed in New York, and it is odd. It feels like you shouldn't be surfing there. I've been in that Times Square surf shop, actually. I think I wrote some quite disparaging comments about the place in Chasing Deans. I hope that poor fella wasn't mentioned in that. But yeah, that Rockaway Beach contest, I thought that was one of the best contests ever to watch. I think partly as well, the US East Coast is perfectly time zoned for watching the finals take place on your couch as night falls over here in Europe. Sounds like a dream surf trip to me to go over there when all of that's going on. Such exciting surfing and history being made, and the waves looked really, really good fun to surf as well. And actually, dream surf trips Now that is a million miles away from where we want to be with the feature that we're going to be using to close our shows out for the immediate future, at least. Back by popular demand, guys. Last and definitely not least, we're going to have another look at surf trip horror stories. Rob, over to you.
Yes, thanks, Tom. So, of the correspondence we've had since our maiden show that went out last week, a lot of it has been about these kind of surf trip horror stories, as you termed it, or the worst surf trips ever. And last week we said we want to find out about the parts of surf trips that suck, that we absolutely don't miss whatsoever, tide us over whilst we're all kind of, well, self-isolating at the moment. And we had a message, we had several messages submitted to us, but this one in particular kind of made my ears prick up. And it's from someone that I know you and I, Tom, both hold in high regard, and someone that we've watched growing up and kind of idolized it on a local level. And that is Mr. Gary Lewis. For your benefit, Andy, Gary is one of, this term is banded around too often, legend, but he is a legend of our local scene. He's one of those guys that seems to have always been around, and he's well traveled and he surfs really well. And this is submitted by him about a trip he recently went on with a few of the other local guys. And I'm just going to read it straight through, and it's a shocker, Tom. Let's go for it. So, the most recent memory of when a surf trip takes an unexpected turn for the worse happened just a few months ago on what's now become an annual trip to Morocco. This year, I felt I needed to blend in with the local hipsters of Tagazout, so I brought along George Schofield and Richard Vaughan, complete with their man buns and beards, well, George at least, and also Dr. Gus for someone to drink beers with. And just as an aside, I heard lots of beers were drunk. There's a few stories George has got about this one too. We leapt into a pretty solid week of swell and based our daily missions around low tide Anchor Point. I'm sure many of your listeners are familiar with the setup here, and it's without doubt the wave that you want to score at least a few times during any trip. The newly renovated car park, renovated meaning moving the piles of rubble somewhere else prior to the QS event, the recent QS event that took place there, sits atop a small rocky headland. This iconic headland has a half-broken set of steps leading to the notoriously treacherous jump-off platforms and the adjacent rocks and sand gullies that are popular with families and fishermen alike. There's a lot of human traffic using these steps and pathways that snake off from them, and I'd guess that it's about a 25-foot drop from the car park to the sea level, and you'll shortly hear about why this is relevant. The car park is a great place to hang out, and as a result, there's always a few small camps based around the travelling surfers campers, along with the assorted converted VW and Mercedes trucks and vans. It can become a bit congested at certain peak times and often results in a bit of chest trying to manoeuvre your hire car or van back out to the road. About a week into our trip, and everyone had mostly recovered from an absolute disaster of a surf at Boilers a few days previously, when all four of us, being far too manly to wear boots, got absolutely vaporized in sequence, one by one, whilst at the most critical point of trying to exit the lineup. I'm not exaggerating when estimating well in excess of 200 urchins between all of us, as well as a fair bit of blood lost by Rich in particular. Anyway, back to anchors, and we were all back in the water. I'd had my fill of runners and head dips, and the donuts were calling me. So I was out sitting on the bonnet of the hire car, not cold gar, by the way, soaking up the sun and watching the action. I saw George and Gus walking towards me, having just climbed the stairs, sunburned and smiling. And at this point, the 2-ton VW lorry/camper that was parked by the side of us started reversing back towards them. And I assumed they were just repositioning themselves to make their way out of the car park. It didn't really register at first how quietly it was heading towards the boys or how quickly it was picking up speed. Luckily, the boys were looking up towards me and not back at the lineup, as we all do at least a dozen times, especially when the peanut gallery starts to whistle in a set. They scurried out of its path at precisely the same time I registered that the engine wasn't running and there was nobody driving. I felt instantly sick and helpless at the same time. The truck had now reached the point where nothing was going to stop it launching, backwards over the headland, directly onto the path below. Same path the boys had been walking on 30 seconds previously, and no doubt where lots of other people were now in the close vicinity of. Well, as they say, time slows down in the tube, and it certainly slowed down for me in that situation. But about 5 seconds before the inevitable carnage, things got infinitely worse. A young woman appeared in the window of the truck with a look on her face that I'll never forget. We locked eyes, and she mouthed some words that didn't register with me, and then just as quickly she disappeared, and the truck went over the headland. There was a stunned silence at what had just happened, closely followed by some hysterical screams, and that was just from George. The reason I can make a joke about it now is that despite the odds of there being multiple fatalities, the truck didn't land on anyone, and the girl survived with nothing but a few minor bumps and scrapes. She later explained how she was in the back of the van and thinking she heard a door open. We now assume that was the sound of the handbrake failing, and when I locked eyes with her, she was looking for the handbrake. However, it wasn't her truck and she couldn't find it in time. She then dived into the back again and tried the side door, but it wouldn't open, so she just curled up in the fetal position and hoped for the best. The van buckled and imploded all around her. The odds of a story like this ending in the way it did are pretty slim, and so our trip ended on a high, apart from our flights being cancelled due to the weekend storms closing down Gatwick for pretty much the first time ever. But that's another story. Well, when I read that from Gary, that there's a moment in it where he said he felt instantly sick and helpless, and I'm sure you both had moments like that on your travels, but I can think of a couple, and it tends to happen in developing countries where you see just something horrific happening, and you just know there's not the support of the infrastructure to resolve it adequately, and it made the hairs on my arms stand up. What a shocker, hey?
Yeah, that's horrible. Andy, you got any horrendous surf trip mishaps?
You know, every surf trip I've been on basically is series of comedy of errors, really, and series of mishaps. But two stories that register in my mind, not really trips of mine, but one which I think people will appreciate because I think the reason people appreciate this story is things going wrong. I think things going wrong is more interesting as a story than things going right. So, a friend of mine, doctor, took a job in South Africa, surfing doctor, by the way, ophthalmologist, in fact, but wanted to surf Cape Town. And so he took this job for several months, I think it was. That's great. That's going to be perfect for me. Found himself, his hospital was actually in Johannesburg. And he hadn't really checked sufficiently beforehand. He thought everything was in Cape Town. Several hundred miles from the beach. So he'd gone there for several months and was further away from the beach than he was in London. So that was possibly one of the worst trips of all time, although I believe he did eventually get to Cape Town where he wasn't too busy at the hospital. Okay, fine. But the one that really is historical to me, because it goes back to the 80s, this is a Californian guy. He's on a surf trip in Europe. Fine, but at one point he got on the wrong plane, got off in Berlin, and okay, this is the interesting thing, when the Berlin Wall was still intact. So he gets off and goes, oh, okay, well, I might as well go and check out the wall while I'm here, but was already pissed off. So gets to the wall, sees all these kind of border guards, trying to stop East Germans coming over to the West, and shouts up at them. This, I believe, is historically testified and then documented. Shouts up at them, man, you are bummed because you will never know what true surfing really is. And the funny thing about that is that he was wrong, because Michael Scott Moore has shown in his records about surfing, and he's half German, Michael Scott Moore, half German-American, but he actually interviewed some of the Berlin Wall border guards afterwards, and they turned out to be surfers. So there you go. So they actually did know what true surfing really was, and that's a fact. So you can be a surfer and a border guard, and there are some not bad waves in Germany. There's quite big surfing culture in Germany, surprisingly. So there you go, Californian guy, you ridiculously stereotype those poor old German border guards. There you go.
I like that. That's a fab one. And we want more tales from our listeners, please. So if you've got any, then please do submit them to us at castcrest@gmail.com. That's castcrest@gmail.com. gmail.com.
Well, yeah, thanks, guys. We've been trying to sort of dampen the stoke, so we've done our best for that last bit. Perfect way to end. The section has proven to be something lots of our surf trip starved listeners have been contacting us with suggestions for. I think it makes people feel better, doesn't it, remembering why nobody misses surf trips. Keep telling ourselves that, and it will become true. Until we can go on them again, and then it's job done anyway. Perhaps we'll have to do a whole podcast on surf trip nightmares sometime. I wonder who the guest would be. As for today's guest, Andy Martin, a big thank you for your time.
Yes,
it's been a joy.
Andy.
The book is out now.
Rob, Tom, that was great. And I'm not going to say anything about my all-time worst whale surf trip, by the way, just because,
We'll have to get you back on for that.
It was raining so hard I couldn't even see the wave. So that, so I don't need to mention that at all.
Oh, great. Waves are usually pumping when the weather's like that anyway. And Andy's book is out now with all books. For our next episode, we're going to be talking to one of the most decorated Welsh surfers and renowned charger, James Rhino Thomas. From competing against an informed Shane Beschen in all-time Huntington to charging frigid UK bombs or the sweltering wilds of the Mentawai Islands, he's got some tales, all right. Until then, keep the stoke, guys. Thanks for listening. Hwyl fawr, a welwch chi y tro nesa, baw.
Cheers, Ed. Bye. Aloha.